welcome back to the Everyday Nut. I'm Joe.
And I'm Jeff.
And Jeff,
Yes, Joe.
would you like a marshmallow?
Well, I'd gladly take a marshmallow now, but I'd wait for two marshmallows later.
Interesting. Well, you can have mine because I don't like marshmallows.
I'm not actually a big marshmallow fan either.
Yeah, even I've even had gourmet
Oh
marshmallows
yeah,
handcrafted
yeah.
by authentic Keeblers under a living in it. I don't like the flavor. I don't like the texture mostly. So, but that being said, what we're talking about today is an experiment, them called the marshmallow test,
Right.
and it's and how it's been revisited over time, and of course, how that relates to the virtues.
Right. And we're talking initially we were talking about the 1972 Stanford University, um,
Marshmallow,
Michel, Ebbison, and Zeiss
yes.
designed three experiments. To,
But I think before we start talking about marshmallows, let's talk about beverages.
let's talk about immediate gratification.
Yes. And
And
what do you have?
I have a Kentucky bourbon whiskey by a company called Three Chord. This is in their strange collaborations um, line.
That should be the official drink of this podcast.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's a straight bourbon whiskey, but it is finished in Pinot Noir casks.
Oh, interesting.
So it does add a very nice, I don't want to say fruity body exactly, but like a almost like a dry Pinot Noir wine.
Interesting.
So yeah, it's very good.
Cool.
And you can get them in Michigan. I'm not sure exactly where the distillery is, but I'm finding these three chord um, bottles in three or four different stores. So, and you, sir, what's your libation for the
I
evening?
have
Ooh, an almost invisible.
almost a 2022 Italian Pinot Grigio.
Okay.
Lightly chilled, was very good with dinner, and I made chicken and vegetables with a pesto sauce.
Oh,
So
very
yeah,
nice.
and it went quite well with that. And so I'm having another glass.
Very
So
good. Oh,
there you go. Mm. Um, so yes. So let's begin with the original experiment, which is commonly known as the marshmallow test, and has been so widely covered that the marshmallow test has really entered the vernacular, that people refer to it as a test of, some way of talking about an ability to delay gratification and,
right.
right,
A
um,
discipline.
discipline. And discipline, as variations of that, are, of course, related to the virtues, your ability to adhere to the principles, chivalric ideals, the principles, to discipline yourself, to be diligent and persevere and be honest and those
Mhm.
sorts of things. And this was very briefly experiment at Stanford, the early 70s, Stanford University, conducted on children,
5 year olds. 5,
five-year-olds, right.
about
And
4 or 5 year olds, if I
we're
remember.
fine. The variations of this were essentially, um, and there were several versions of this, but simply put, hey kid, here's a marshmallow. I'm putting this in front of you. If you don't eat it now, you'll get two in 15 minutes.
Right. If you can
Right.
wait, if you can not eat this for 15 minutes,
You'll get
you'll
two.
get another,
Yeah,
you'll get two more.
two more. And they, some kids could wait, some couldn't. Some, the coping techniques, actually, if you've ever watched the videos, it's it's
Yeah,
it's
it's
cute
cute.
and charming, and I feel bad for these poor kids because they're like looking the other direction and sitting on their hands, and then some of them like nibbling on the underside and putting it down so it
Yeah.
died. Right. And some just ate it. Um, but what they were trying to do was see how the ability to, first of all, at what age the ability to exercise self-control of delay for delayed gratification, and what age does that begin? And then if children demonstrate that, they track them throughout for years. It was a longitudinal study. They tracked them later to see what their lives were like. Did it indicate success in life, in school, in work, in relationships, and so on? And that was the idea of the experiment.
Well,
Um,
the in the conclusion they drew, they after studying for so many years, is that the children, to varying degrees, but the majority of the children who showed some ability to discipline their gratification did have somewhat more success on average. Right? It didn't seem that conclusive to me,
yeah,
um, with all the other factors that we're going to talk about. But it was certainly used by the people who did the study to push this sort of narrative of, well, this is a absolutely necessary, factor in later success, that you need to discipline yourself and
yeah.
and
It's interesting that about the same time at Stanford, the infamous Stanford prison experiment took place. And that one, for people who don't know, although people have heard about it and there have been films about it, and
yeah,
that there was an experiment. It was supposed to go 2 weeks. Students were divided into prisoners and guards, and it was ended after 6 days because the guards acted so brutally to the
right.
prisoners, and those who were they all the students needed counseling afterwards. Now, there's questions about that because there's and again, this has been revisited a number of times. What were the guards directed to behave badly, or did they simply do that because they were in a position of power? It was designed to test the, I guess you could call the psychological theory that even ordinary people can become evil if they're given too much power.
Right. Eh, Well, and they did a couple of other things in that study, as I remember. They gave the guards mirrored sunglasses
Yes,
so that it gave them a psychological mask, a barrier between themselves and the prisoner
right.
subjects. So they played psychological games with them, really, to prove out their theory.
And there's some opinion that they were, what the experimenters were doing, and this is controversial and it's unclear, opinions, conclusions both ways, or evidence both ways, that the experimenters were trying to prove a conclusion that they'd already made rather than experimenting and seeing what the result would be.
Right.
Um, so, but it's interesting that that happened at the same time. So since the original marshmallow experiment, it's been revisited several times. And one of the times it's been revisited, they experimented with setting up the adult as either a person who could be trusted or not trusted. So they did preliminary experiments like, oh, here are some crappy drawing materials. If if you use, you can use these, or if you wait, I'll return in 15 minutes with better materials.
Right.
And then sometimes they'd have better materials, and sometimes they'd say, oh, no, sorry, don't. And they do several of those with variations of other things, stickers or something. And then they do the marshmallow experiment. And they found that I say that for a reason, the children who had the untrustworthy, and at the end, all of the children got 3 additional marshmallows, whether
Right.
they ate them or not. But the children who had untrustworthy adults ate their marshmallows within a couple of minutes, and the ones who had trustworthy adults waited much longer. It was like 12 minutes or 15 minutes. It was an enormous difference.
Well,
So,
except that it was, and I wanted to just point out that it was a
yes,
huge difference, but it wasn't black and white. It wasn't, the
yes,
percentages were higher that they waited and didn't wait.
right. It
Yeah,
wasn't black and white exactly, but
it's
it was
scaled obviously.
right. And so I have said when I've taught um, marketing, advertising classes, any kind of classes like that, I've said to students, which is why I said students, I said, what is the first essential thing necessary for anyone to do business with anyone else? Trust.
Trust.
You have to trust that you're going to get what you pay for. You have to trust that you'll be paid for what you're doing. That there has to be a trust relationship. Um, and one of the purposes of marketing communication generally is to and branding is to develop a trustworthy brand. It's the power of brand names is that people know what they are, they trust them, and so on. That's why a McDonald's serving a Big Mac in one place, you go across the country and a Big Mac there is the same thing.
Yep.
It's trust. You can trust what it's going to be. Hotels do the same thing. That's it's essential.
Hmm.
And so if you can't trust what you're going to that promises will be kept, that affects behavior.
Right.
Yep.
And it and so what they talked about in this study is that affects behavior, and they they sort of drew a tenuous or extenuated conclusion that maybe in the earlier study where they didn't do the trust part, that many of the kids who had come from an untrustworthy environment in the first place, that would have affected their test, how they tested. They
Exactly.
couldn't, they just didn't trust grown-ups. They didn't trust an adult because their upbringing had not led them to trust.
Yes. And they obviously didn't control for that.
Right.
So I think that was a really interesting variation on the experiment. I think what would be interesting, and I didn't see if there were any follow-ups to this. The first one, the original marshmallow test, they did a longitudinal study to see the success, so on, achievements of the children. On this one, children who were conditioned to trust or not trust, first of all, how did they control for that with children coming in? If they already didn't trust or did trust, that wasn't clear. And then did they follow them to see, okay, what's the effect, the long-term effect of growing up or experiencing a situation when you trust people or you don't trust people.
Right. Well,
And
and they haven't had the time. That I think that
yeah,
second test was in 2015.
um, let's see, there's
There's a 2015 and a 2021 test.
2020, yes. The 2021, and this is another thing they tested for, is that they found that there was actually children who waited longer in this 2020 version, which was at UC San Diego, University of California, San Diego. Children who waited longer cared more about what other people thought of them.
Well, they were told that
They
their
were, yes,
teacher or someone that they viewed as an authority figure would
yes,
be told how long they could wait.
yes. So it was, so it was people whose opinion of them they cared about, which in some ways talks to the virtue of renown, and that we've talked, I mean, not virtue, but renown is a consequence of the virtue,
Yes.
not a virtue itself. It's a consequence.
Yeah.
How your, in the modern parlance, reputation.
Mhm.
As we said before, there's a difference between renown and infamy, but now it's just being famous, and that's
Yeah.
different.
And
Um,
I think there's a slight difference in my mind between renown and reputation. Reputation is amongst those who know you. Renown is what people who don't know you think they know about you.
mm, I think that's a really good distinction. Yeah. Um, would you say there's a parallel in infamy and something else? Would you say infamy
Well,
is those who don't know you, or and
I don't know. Reputation is fairly neutral. You can have
can
a good
be
reputation or
or
bad
bad?
reputation,
Yeah. Okay.
and you can have renown or you can have infamy.
Right.
They're sort of opposites. So
Right. Um, so I think the first takeaway I take from the first takeaway from all of this is that people are a lot more complicated than um
than any study could ever possibly
yes.
determine.
There's so many factors going on. I remember when I was a freshman and taking intro psychology and participating in experiments because you had to do that. That uh, some of them were not very well designed, and
Yeah.
it I've heard it said that psychology is should be called the psychology of college freshmen because that's who a lot of the subjects are because
Yeah.
they're required to.
Right. And they're free subjects. Do you think? You know,
Yeah,
they don't
yeah.
get.
Um, but it's people are complicated. So all the variables, considering all the variables, is really complicated to do, if it's even possible. It would
Well,
not surprise me if further experiments reveal other considerations in this.
yeah. Right.
I
And,
don't like marshmallows. It would be easy for me
well, and
because
I think that's why well, yeah, right. Don't tempt me with something I hate. But the idea that, um, and I think it's important that that's why the larger data set you have
yes,
is important, in whether or not you're, because if you're the data set of one, you're right, the experiment would absolutely fail
right,
because you don't care for marshmallows in any
right. So they
sense.
can eliminate outliers in the
Right.
data.
And then it's percentages. Like even
Yes,
in these studies, it's either A or B. It's the graph shows that the majority would do that, and in this case, the majority would do something else
yes,
under different circumstances. But it's not an absolute
Right.
100% this happens and 100% that happens. So and that's, I think the problem that was with the original study is that they came up with this conclusion. Well, clearly, if you have
Yeah.
better self-discipline, you'll be more successful. Well, that's that, no, you have a greater chance,
Yes.
maybe,
Maybe.
or
Maybe.
you
But there are many other, so
you're
many other
statistically
factors.
more likely is all the
Yeah.
best you could say.
So many other factors. I would like to see an experiment where they promised a marshmallow and it looks like a marshmallow, but it's actually a block of tofu. And I'd like you to be the subject, knowing what you think of tofu.
And well, I mean, I I don't object to tofu intrinsically. I just don't think you can substitute tofu for anything else. Tofu is tofu, and
It's
it's
its own
what it
thing.
is.
Yeah.
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 You can't make something out of tofu and say it's like tofurkey. Remember when that was a thing?
I've
No.
had tofurkey. I have
Yeah,
had tofurkey,
and
and
that's
I don't need to do that again.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's yeah. Um, I think the certain it's I think there's so many factors going into who the subjects are and what their lives are, what the circumstances are, that and understanding that is also extremely difficult because people lie on surveys.
oh yeah.
There's when I was studying um the marketing research component of my studies, and part of that was surveys. How do you minimize the effect of people telling you what they think you want to hear? And that's related to how people care about their reputation, right?
And
Even
even
they don't know you. Hmm.
and even if it's a self-image thing,
Right. Yes.
right? They don't want to think of themselves as someone who would do this, so they'll say, "Well, no, I wouldn't do that."
Right.
Even
Um, even if they would. So even survey data or something to collect information about the subjects of the experiment, in this case, children, the information would be from their parents. They're not going to say, my
Mhm.
child doesn't trust me because I'm a lousy parent and I don't give them what they, so how to screen for that would be incredibly difficult.
Well,
Um,
I wondered at when I was reading the review of that review that I wonder what would have happened if they had tested children from, I don't know, a close-knit religious community
mhm.
as one set, and then another set of children who had gone through the foster
Oh,
care
yeah,
program, and
yeah.
how those sets would have differed in
I
general.
think the takeaway that another takeaway from this would be that my focus would be on what are the actions that cause children to develop trusting relationships. How can you improve trusting relationships, and what do adults need to do so that children grow up trusting in a
Right.
trusting, which is, everybody gets disappointed now and then.
Yeah.
Like people they thought they could trust. But if you don't trust anybody, that's a very negative place to be and can affect relationships, all sorts of things. So um, I think that would be the application of the ideas within this are more interest to me than things that these studies may or may not reveal. So
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we can certainly agree that a certain amount of self-discipline and ability to persevere and work towards a distant goal rather than simply, you know, acting on your immediate impulse
yes,
certainly has value, right? I mean, you work all week to get a paycheck on Friday, you know, but you got to trust that that paycheck's going to be there on
yeah,
Friday.
yeah,
So, but, or, putting money in a savings account so that, 40 years from now, you'll have some things saved. I mean, it's the ants and the grasshopper, right? And
right.
the fable. Um,
Well, I'm the example that comes to mind, but it's kind of top of mind for me is working on a book, writing a book, which is a lengthy process that particularly if it's something like I've been working on that requires research and a lot of time to do that and with the conviction that at the end you will have something it's yeah, that's perseverance.
yeah.
um
Well, and just the
the
idea.
martial sport we do, you don't get good right away, you have to
No,
stick to it. Art, you
there's no
have to.
guarantee when you start that you'll ever be great.
No. It's something you keep working at. And even there's no end point either. You don't suddenly you're great and then you don't have to do anymore. Now you have to do even more for less improvement. I mean, the slope, levels off. It can keep going up, but it's um and artwork takes, there are people who I always remember that it was a wine commercial, I think Sir John Gielgud, I
Oh,
think.
yes.
He was serving. He was a like a server in a gallery, art gallery show, and with carrying wine glasses, and he's walking past, and this one black clad emo artist is saying, "Would you believe I painted this in just an hour?" And Gielgud says, "Yes, I would," and he walks on. Um, I always think of that. Um, and so unless you're one of those, it actually takes time. And it's not even that you can't do something quickly. It's that the time you have to spend to get to be able to develop the
Right.
skill to be able to do something quickly, like the old story of the well, I didn't tell stories, but the artist who's hired by the emperor to paint the perfect picture of a dragon, and he says, "I need a house,
Tiger.
I need supplies, and tiger,
Tiger.
dra
He lives with the tiger for a
yes."
year. Right.
There's
Yeah.
there's so many variations of the story. I heard dragon, I heard 10 years, so all the supplies. Finally, the emperor says, "I demand to see the perfect drawing of a painting of a dragon," and the artist sits down and he does it, and boom, there it is. And the emperor says, "Yes, it's perfect, but why did it take you, if you could do it in a minute, why did it take you 10 years?" And he opens up a door to a room and it's full of
Yes.
practice. So lots of variations of that story. Even though it's absolutely true, it happened to my uncle. Um,
Uncle Izzy.
my uncle Izzy, exactly. Izzy, um, when he lived
Spent a brief time well,
in
10 years in
Asia.
China.
And yes, so um, I think there are lessons from this about um, the complexity of human beings, the value of perseverance, the value of discipline, and how they should have picked something other than marshmallows.
Well, they might have. Now, and I think that there's another kind of lesson here, that don't let somebody tell you that your level of discipline is insufficient to the
Yeah.
things you want.
Yes.
There, it's up to you what you want. You can be as disciplined or as not disciplined as you want, and you can be as happy with what you get with immediate gratification as you can if you're some kind of tight ass miserly Scrooge like figure who grubs every penny so that you can retire at 50.
Those are
And
not opposites, though. Those are, I mean, those are extremes.
well, of
You're
course
talking
they,
about
that's
extremes,
what I'm saying.
but it's like the opposite of a lack of control is not miserliness and stinginess. There's balance. We talk about balance in
But
all
that's
these
what I'm saying,
things.
that there's
Right.
it's a spectrum, right? And that's what I'm
Right.
saying. The amount of
Yeah.
discipline you apply will probably be reflected in the amount of reward you get, but but it's okay either way.
Right.
There's no one should be telling you that you have to be this kind of a person if you're going to have any chance of being happy in the rest of your life.
I think even more, no one should tell you that some test you took when you were 5 years
No.
old determines all the rest of your life.
Yeah. Well,
That
and
I
that's
think,
they even say that in some of the reviews of the reviews, is that, well, this test is clearly as good an indicator of how at 5 years old what a person's going to grow up to be like as any other test at 5 years old is going to tell you what kind of person you're going to be when you grow up. It's
which,
it's it's as good as astrology, I think.
yeah, yeah,
That
yeah, yeah. So, um, I think psychology is fascinating, and actually, in the some of the a lot of the courses I've taught, there's a component of psychology in it because it's understanding people's behavior, and sometimes people behave counterintuitively to what
yes,
we think. Um, I remember one study, and it's been repeated a lot of times that there's if you if you give somebody a discount on something, you can increase the likelihood of purchase, but if it's too great a discount, you actually decrease the likelihood of purchase because
right,
people don't trust that it's what they're going to get anything that is worth that they're actually going to get it. And I
right,
think that's only increased with um the social media advertising for companies where you see pictures of something and it looks great and it's, oh, you can get a Cadillac for 25 cents and it's,
it's become a kind of a meme joke of the Wish version of
right,
something, right? Like there's a Cadillac or a Iron Man suit, and the Wish version of it is plastic pieces spray painted with gold paint, and
right.
it looks
Yeah,
ridiculous because
yeah.
it's a tenth of the cost of the thing that they actually have a
And
picture.
overpriced at that. But yeah.
Yeah, right.
So
And that's a trust thing too, though, right?
yeah,
Because
absolutely.
there you get what you pay for. Now,
Or
that's
less. You
or
get what
less.
or less.
But
Yeah,
that's one of the oldest adages in advertising,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's a subtext to advertising that here's rich Corinthian leather, and it's going to be worth this much money because of the all the time and care that we've put into it. When the fact is particularly in the auto industry, right? The fact is that these cars are rolling off the same assembly lines, and they have exactly the same amount of training as the assemblers do.
Well,
Uh,
the fluted lower body side moldings, gold tone headlamp bezels. I'm familiar with the with all
yeah,
the verbiage, right?
right. And
Um,
in some cases, that is polishing it verbally this was a
yeah,
necessary engineering thing, but look, you know,
right.
this is a feature, not an absolute necessity for the engineering of the
Right.
thing. This
Well,
is a
and
luxury that
you'll
you're getting.
see in real estate advertising, charming
Yeah, which means small.
or ready
Conven-
for you to make your own. Oh, it's a fixer upper.
Convenient to transportation, which means there's a train that runs by 6 feet from your house.
Or through it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I saw a list of those definitions, I think, from a realtor that
There was many years ago in advertising age, there was how to translate an account executive. And it was they say, hey, have you got 5 minutes? And what they really mean is you can kiss your lunch hour goodbye. And um, I've got just a few small changes, means we'll have to completely start over from scratch. So I thought that was funny, and it's in the same vein. Um, uh, okay, well, I trust that we have maybe discussed this.
Yeah, well, this was a pretty narrow focused
Yeah,
um, subject, I think. So I think we've done a pretty
yes,
thorough, well, at least of our, we've managed to thoroughly expound on our opinions about this.
yes, yes.
We certainly haven't taken a scholarly look at the studies themselves,
At the study, well, I
but we're not
have,
scholars of that. We're not scholars. We're not pretending to be.
well, I have peer reviewed, I've been a peer reviewer for a couple of journal articles. And um, wow. Um, there were some of them were, well, there were challenges in um
So
yeah.
to you're as a peer reviewing something of
Yes.
a peer in what?
Well, it was article for a marketing
Okay,
or
mark
advertising journal.
marketing journal.
Yeah. And it was they were studies, and they were publishing their study in a journal. And it was, here are the conditions of the experiment, and here's what we did, and here's the results, essentially. And here's the literature review, here's all the things that are written about it, here's how what we're doing is different or expands on something, here's the directions for further research, here's what we couldn't get out of this and why we need to do further research. The experiments are very narrow. They're
Hmm.
very narrow. Um, and there were problems with um, some where uh, the ones I tend to get asked about to do ones that have a creative and or design component
Right.
the in their experiment. The problem, and rather than talk about those, I'll talk about another one because I didn't review that one, but it's one that I wrote about, critiqued about, and it was a study of reading comprehension with a single space after a period or two spaces after a period,
That
and
that is narrow.
that's what the study was. But the
Okay.
problem was they used Courier in
Oh,
their test. They used a monospaced type. So monospaced type is each letter takes the same width, is the
yep.
same width, like
Yep.
on a typewriter. Whereas a modern typeface, the letters are proportional.
Right.
So when I used a typewriter, of course, I would put two spaces because everything that it's monospaced, everything it needs two spaces after a period. When I switch to a computer and proportional type, where not only are the letters proportional, so an M is wider than an I,
Hmm.
but the kerning the space between letters is also proportional.
Right.
And so a single space is sufficient in that case after a period. They didn't do that. They didn't test that. They tested reading comprehension using a monospace type. And of course, two spaces are going to be superior.
Yeah.
Well, that would have been relevant 50 years ago, maybe, but it wasn't relevant when this study came out. So,
I'm surprised that a modern study would use Courier.
because they weren't designers.
Well, I
And they
mean,
didn't talk to designers. And they didn't,
but even then, if they were, to
they
me,
didn't know what they're doing. So,
okay,
but it's been cited like this study about marshmallows. It's been cited as, see, two spaces after a period are better. Well,
right.
only if you're using like the 1913 Underwood typewriter that in 12-point type that I typed my college papers on, because a 3-page paper would be, 100 words.
Right.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Huh.
no.
So you need to do another study. You need to refute their study with your own study with like 3 different fonts.
Yeah. There have been some really interesting ones about so there's a typeface, the common typeface that was used on highway signs since the 1950s. It's called
Mhm.
the Highway Gothic.
Yep.
But it was hard to read at night. Letters looked too much like each other. It was not very as legible as it could be because of the design of the typeface. So some years ago, a new typeface was designed called Clearview, much better, easier to read, easier to distinguish between. So legibility is the ability to distinguish individual letters from each other. Readability is the ability to comprehend a word
Yes.
or block of type. It's better for both of those. And places started implementing that, and then they stopped because there were improvements in the material from which
Oh,
signs were made, and the improved reflective material of the signage meant it wasn't as big a deal as it was. There was also an additional cost in
well,
in
fitting all the signs.
and licensing.
They had to license the
I
font.
think they had to license it. Yeah.
Oh my God.
So they didn't do it. It's still better, but so there's a bunch of typographic studies that I find really interesting, but
Well, you and I would find them more interesting, I
yeah,
think, than the rest of our audience.
yeah,
But
I think so.
let's. Right
So now,
then.
okay, so now that we've effectively tangented,
Yes, because we hadn't done that up to now.
right now, I think we can say we've um,
We've thoroughly plumbed this subject, or at least to the
well,
satisfaction.
there's an old expression about banging a tea kettle.
I,
Banging a tea kettle.
I didn't even know that tea kettle.
It's yes, it's essentially the same as kicking a dead horse, banging a tea kettle. It's the same sort of thing.
Okay. Okay, good.
Okay.
Another
So
horse
with
here.
that,
Nothing, nothing.
yeah, okay. So with that, thank you for listening. Please like and share. Please suggest topics you'd like us to speak about. And until we see you next time, be thou
A good night.
and true.